In the dead of night, where the veil between reality and nightmare thins, we venture into the unknown. From the haunted corridors of a derelict asylum to the ghostly echoes of a vengeful past. Prepare yourself as we uncover secrets best left buried and confront the darkness that lies hidden within. Welcome to Fear Files.
The moon hung low over the city, casting long shadows across the deserted streets. The abandoned hospital, a grim monument to a forgotten era, stood eerily silent under the pale light. It had been years since it closed its doors, a casualty of scandalous experiments and whispers of dark practices. Now it was nothing more than a crumbling shell, its secrets hidden in the darkness. Jeffrey Reed, a 30-year-old freelance photographer, stood at the edge of the decrepit building, his camera slung over his shoulder. With his grizzled beard and determined eyes, Jeffrey was known for his daring explorations of forgotten places. His friends, Emma, Lucas, and Sarah, gathered around him, each armed with their own gear and a mix of excitement and trepidation. "Are you sure this is a good idea?" Emma asked, her voice tinged with nervousness. Jeffrey smirked. "We're here to document history. Just stick together and we'll be fine." They entered the hospital through a rusted side door, the creaking hinges protesting against their intrusion. The interior was a labyrinth of decay, peeling paint, broken tiles, and the pervasive smell of mildew. The only sounds were the echoes of their footsteps and the distant dripping of water. As they ventured deeper into the hospital, the air grew colder and the shadows seemed to shift. The group's laughter and conversation slowly faded, replaced by uneasy silence. They set up their cameras and started documenting the grim surroundings. Suddenly, Lucas froze, his face paling. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. Emma and Sarah exchanged nervous glances, but Jeffrey shrugged it off. "It's probably just the old building settling. Let's keep moving." Yet, as they continued, the whispers grew louder, indistinguishable but persistent. The shadows appeared to lengthen and twist, forming unsettling shapes at the periphery of their vision. A sudden draft made the temperature drop, and the oppressive atmosphere seemed to close in around them. Hours passed in a haze of unease. The group's excitement had waned, replaced by growing fear. They decided to take a break, huddled together in the dilapidated cafeteria. Jeffrey checked his watch. "It's getting late. We should think about heading back." As they prepared to leave, they noticed that Lucas was missing. Panic set in as they called his name, but there was no response. The hospital seemed to swallow their voices, the silence unnervingly complete. Where could he have gone? Sarah's voice quivered. Emma's face was pale. "We need to find him, now." The search led them deeper into the hospital, where the whispers grew louder and more insistent. The building seemed to warp and shift, its corridors elongating and twisting into a nightmarish maze. Shadows danced just out of sight, and every corner seemed to hold some new horror. Desperation turned to terror as they realized they were lost. The hospital's malevolence became palpable, its walls seeming to breathe with sinister intent. The whispers turned into disembodied voices, taunting them with their deepest fears and regrets. Jeffrey was gripped by a vision of his past, replaying a traumatic event that had shaped his fear of confinement. Emma saw glimpses of her failed relationships. Lucas's voice echoed with apologies. And Sarah was haunted by childhood fears. The hospital fed on their fears, amplifying their anxieties and disorienting them further. They began to suspect that the building itself was alive, a dark entity that thrived on their suffering. The group stumbled upon a room that appeared to be a makeshift operating theater, the walls lined with old medical equipment and faded charts. On an old examination table lay a collection of bizarre and unsettling artifacts, including a blood-stained surgical mask and rusty surgical tools. Jeffrey's camera flickered and died, plunging them into darkness. The whispers intensified into a cacophony of agony and rage. As they fumbled for their flashlights, they heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoing behind them. A sudden, blinding flash revealed Lucas standing in the corner, his face ashen and eyes vacant. He murmured incoherently, his words barely audible over the din of the whispers. The group approached him, but he collapsed, his body racked with unseen forces. The whispers grew into a roar, and the walls seemed to close in. The remaining explorers made a frantic bid for escape. Jeffrey led them down a corridor that seemed to stretch endlessly. Every turn and intersection only led them deeper into the hospital's labyrinthine embrace. They reached a large hall with a series of old, rusting doors, each one marked with cryptic symbols and stains. In the center of the hall, a mirror stood, its surface covered in grime. As they approached it, the mirror cleared, revealing the reflections of the spirits trapped within the hospital. The spirits, gaunt and sorrowful, reached out with pleading hands. They whispered tales of betrayal and suffering, revealing the dark history of the hospital and the experiments that had turned it into a place of horror. Realizing that the spirits sought retribution, Jeffrey and his friends confronted their own fears and regrets. They apologized to the spirits, acknowledging their suffering and the injustices of the past. The hospital's oppressive grip began to weaken as they made their peace. The walls of the hospital trembled as if in anguish. The spirits, finally heard and acknowledged, began to fade. The hospital's malevolence seemed to dissipate, its power waning as it lost its hold on its victims. Jeffrey and the remaining explorers stumbled out of the building, gasping for fresh air. The once foreboding structure loomed behind them, now just a crumbling ruin under the moonlight. As they walked away, the echoes of the hospital's torment faded into the night. The explorers had survived, but they were forever chained by their encounter with the malevolent entity. Back in the safety of their homes, the survivors tried to piece together their experiences. The hospital was sealed off and left to decay, its horrors now just a dark memory. Jeffrey resumed his work as a photographer, but found himself haunted by the ordeal. The images he captured from the hospital were unsettling, a reminder of the darkness that lay hidden in the forgotten corners of the world. Emma, Sarah, and Jeffrey remained close, bonded by their shared trauma. They became advocates for historical preservation and the acknowledgement of past injustices, their experience driving their commitment to uncovering and confronting the shadows of history. Years later, Jeffrey returned to the city for a conference on urban exploration and historical preservation. The town had moved on, and the hospital's legend had become a cautionary tale rather than a haunting presence. As Jeffrey walked through the city, he felt a sense of closure. The experience with the hospital had been harrowing, but it had also taught him the importance of facing the past and seeking resolution. The hospital remained a chilling reminder of the fragility of rational understanding when confronted with the supernatural. Jeffrey carried the lessons of his ordeal into his future work, always aware of the darkness that lurked just beyond the light. Daniel Carter's flashlight cut through the oppressive darkness as he and his team approached the crumbling edifice of the old hospital. It loomed ahead, its once grand facade now a grotesque skeleton of its former self. The moonlight cast long shadows, and the silence was heavy with anticipation. "All right, team, this is it," Daniel said, his voice steady despite the creeping anxiety in his gut. "Remember, we stick together and document everything." Emma, a tech-savvy member of the team, adjusted her camera gear. "I still can't believe we're actually doing this." Lucas, the skeptic of the group, shrugged. "Let's just hope this place is more interesting than haunted." Sarah, the historian, glanced at the building's ominous structure. The legends about this place are pretty disturbing. I've read that Dr. Hale was obsessed with immortality. They entered through a side door, the rusted hinges groaning in protest. The air inside was stale, filled with the musty scent of decay. The group made their way through the darkened corridors, their flashlights revealing faded murals and abandoned medical equipment. As they explored, the explorers encountered an unsettling silence, occasionally broken by the distant clatter of something heavy being dropped. The building seemed alive, its walls whispering secrets of the past. Emma noticed an old hospital directory on a wall. Look at this. It's like a map of the hospital's old layout. Maybe it'll help us navigate. Lucas scoffed. Or maybe it's just a relic from a time when this place was still functioning. Sarah shivered as they moved deeper into the hospital. The stories say that Dr. Hale performed terrible experiments here, trying to extend life through dark rituals. They turned a corner and discovered a ward that was eerily pristine, with surgical instruments laid out as if ready for use. The sight sent chills down their spines. The shadows seemed to dance around them, and the air grew colder. The explorers began to experience strange phenomena. Whispers echoed through the halls, and ghostly apparitions of patients appeared, their faces twisted in agony. The hospital seemed to respond to their fear, amplifying it with every step they took. Sarah found an old medical journal with cryptic entries about Dr. Hale's experiments. This journal mentions rituals and sacrifices, things that sound more like dark magic than medicine. Emma's flashlight flickered, and she saw a shadow move across the wall. Did you see that? Lucas, trying to stay rational, dismissed it. Probably just a trick of the light. But as the hours passed, the whispers grew louder, and the shadows more persistent. The group's nerves were fraying, and they realized that the hospital was more than just a decaying building. It was a living entity, feeding off their fear. In their search for an exit, the explorers stumbled upon a hidden staircase leading to a forgotten basement level. The air grew colder as they descended, and the whispers turned into a cacophony of anguished voices. At the bottom of the stairs, they discovered a concealed ward. The room was filled with bizarre, archaic surgical instruments and strange symbols etched into the walls. In the center of the room stood a large, tarnished mirror. The mirror reflected their horrified faces, but behind them they saw the ghostly figure of Dr. Hale. His eyes were hollow, and his expression was one of intense, unfulfilled rage. "Welcome to my eternal ward," his voice echoed, sending shivers down their spines. "You have come to witness my final experiment." Dr. Hale's spirit began to reveal the details of his dark rituals. He had sought immortality through human sacrifices, performing horrific experiments to prolong his life. The wards had been filled with patients who had suffered unimaginable pain, their souls trapped in the hospital's walls. The explorers realized that the hospital's malevolent presence was a manifestation of Dr. Hale's twisted quest for immortality. The spirits of the patients were trapped, their suffering feeding the hospital's dark energy. As the group struggled to understand the full extent of Dr. Hale's practices, they were confronted by the vengeful spirits of the patients. The apparitions moved with a terrifying purpose, their faces twisted in eternal torment. The explorers, now desperate and terrified, had to find a way to break the cycle of torment. They discovered an old, hidden chamber containing a ritual altar. The altar was covered with items related to Dr. Hale's experiments, including blood-stained cloths and ritualistic symbols. Using the journal and clues they had found, they realized that performing a counter-ritual might break the hospital's hold on the spirits. They had to confront their own fears and perform the ritual to appease the tormented souls. As they began the ritual, the hospital's malevolent presence grew more intense. The spirits of the patients surged around them, their anguish palpable. The explorers' fears and doubts threatened to undo their efforts, but they pressed on, determined to end the cycle of suffering. The climax of the story is a harrowing confrontation between the explorers and Dr. Hale's spirit. The ritual reached its peak, and the hospital's walls seemed to writhe with malevolent energy. The echoes of past torments filled the air, and the explorers struggled to maintain their focus. Dr. Hale's spirit, enraged and desperate, tried to stop the ritual, manifesting as a terrifying spectral figure. The battle between the living and the dead reached a fever pitch, with the hospital itself seemingly fighting against the explorers' attempts to free the trapped souls. As the ritual approached completion, the explorers felt the oppressive weight of the hospital lift. The spirits of the patients began to fade, their tormented expressions softening. Dr. Hale's spirit let out a final, anguished cry before disappearing, leaving the hospital in an eerie silence. The explorers emerged from the hospital, physically and emotionally exhausted. The once terrifying building now stood silent, its malevolent presence seemingly quelled. The oppressive atmosphere had lifted, and the hospital seemed like any other abandoned structure. Daniel and his team took a moment to reflect on their harrowing experience. They had uncovered the dark truth behind the hospital's horrors and had witnessed the suffering of the souls trapped within its walls. They were forever changed by their encounter with the malevolent spirit of Dr. Hale and the tormented patients. As they left the hospital behind, they knew that their experience would haunt them forever. The shadows of the eternal ward would remain etched in their memories, a chilling reminder of the consequences of tampering with forces beyond human comprehension. The hospital, though now silent, remained a stark symbol of the dark legacy of Dr. Hale's quest for immortality. The explorers had survived their ordeal, but the echoes of the past would forever linger in the shadows. Henry Carter had always thrived on adventure, but nothing had ever intrigued him as much as Blackwood Sanitarium. When the opportunity arose to explore the infamous asylum, he was eager to dive into the history of one of the city's most notorious places. The asylum, once a facility for the criminally insane, had been abandoned for decades, leaving behind a legacy of madness and horror. Accompanied by his friends, Claire, the skeptical historian with a fascination for the macabre, James, the tech-savvy skeptic who dismissed ghost stories as mere tricks of the mind, and Lisa, the thrill-seeker with a personal connection to the asylum. They set out with high spirits. Their goal was to document their exploration, hoping to uncover the truth behind the asylum's dark reputation. The group arrived at the asylum just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the dilapidated building. As they approached the entrance, the air grew thick with anticipation and an underlying chill. The imposing structure loomed over them, its windows dark and vacant like hollow eyes. The heavy metal doors creaked open with a groan that echoed through the abandoned halls. Inside, the asylum was a labyrinth of decay and disrepair. Flickering flashlights revealed peeling paint, rusted medical equipment, and broken furniture scattered haphazardly. The stench of mildew and old blood permeated the air. Henry led the way with his camera, capturing every detail. Claire, armed with historical documents, tried to piece together the asylum's dark past. James set up his equipment to record any supernatural occurrences, while Lisa, with a mix of excitement and apprehension, wandered off to explore the darker corners of the building. The explorers' laughter and banter slowly faded as they ventured deeper into the asylum. The oppressive silence of the building seemed to weigh heavily upon them, broken only by the occasional drip of water from a broken pipe or the distant scurrying of rats. As the night wore on, the atmosphere grew increasingly unsettling. Strange noises began to punctuate the silence, muffled whispers, footsteps echoing in empty corridors, and the soft clinking of metal. The explorers dismissed these sounds as the creaks and groans of an old building. but an uneasy feeling settled over them. Henry's camera caught fleeting shadows moving just out of the corner of the lens. Claire noticed that the walls were covered with disturbing scribblings and faded bloodstains. James's equipment picked up inexplicable fluctuations in temperature and electromagnetic fields. Lisa, drawn to an eerie sense of dread, became increasingly agitated. The explorers began to experience disturbing hallucinations. Claire saw fleeting images of patients in chains, their faces twisted in agony. James's devices showed bizarre readings that seemed to defy explanation. Lisa's excitement turned to fear as she felt hands grasping at her from the shadows. Henry, who had been the most skeptical, found himself grappling with the harsh reality of the asylum's horrors. He began to question his sanity as he witnessed ghostly apparitions and heard whispers urging him to join them. His once firm grasp on reality started to slip as the asylum's malevolent presence began to invade his mind. Desperation led the group to discover a hidden ward deep within the asylum. The room was filled with eerie surgical instruments and the lingering scent of antiseptic mixed with something far more sinister. Old patient records, stained and torn, revealed the details of the inhumane treatments administered by the asylum's staff. As they delved deeper into the hidden ward, they encountered ghostly apparitions of patients in torment, their faces frozen in eternal agony. The spirits seemed to reach out to the explorers, begging for release from their suffering. The asylum's walls seemed to close in on them, amplifying their fear and confusion. The explorers uncovered a series of diary entries and records detailing the dark practices of Dr. Harold Finch, the former head psychiatrist. His experiments were gruesome, designed to test the limits of human endurance and sanity. Finch's quest for immortality involved cruel and sadistic rituals intended to transfer his consciousness into a more durable vessel. The records revealed Finch's twisted belief that he could conquer death through the suffering of others. His malevolent spirit, it seemed, had become an integral part of the asylum's cursed existence, feeding off the fear and despair of those who entered. As the explorers' ordeal intensified, they faced more direct confrontations with Dr. Finch's spirit and the tormented ghosts of the asylum's past. The building itself seemed to come alive, warping the corridors and creating a nightmarish maze designed to trap them. Henry and his team fought to maintain their sanity, battling both physical and psychological attacks. They experienced violent visions and physical manifestations of their deepest fears. The asylum's grip on their minds tightened, pushing them to the brink of madness. The climax of their ordeal came as they faced Dr. Finch's spirit in a final confrontation. The group discovered that the only way to break the curse was to destroy the source of Finch's power, a collection of dark artifacts hidden within the asylum. Their struggle to destroy the artifacts and banish Finch's spirit became a desperate race against time. With their resolve tested and their strength nearly exhausted, they managed to complete the ritual needed to dispel Finch's malevolent presence. The asylum's oppressive atmosphere lifted, but not without leaving lasting scars on the explorers. The surviving explorers emerged from the asylum, forever changed by their experience. The trauma they endured had left physical and emotional scars. Henry's photographs captured the haunting remains of the asylum, but the real horror was etched into their minds. The asylum, now seemingly abandoned, bore the marks of their struggle. The once active presence of Dr. Finch and his tormented patients had been quelled, but the building's dark past lingered like a shadow over its desolate halls. In the aftermath of their harrowing experience, the explorers reflected on the nature of the asylum's curse and the true extent of its horrors. Their story became a cautionary tale about the boundaries of human curiosity and the consequences of delving into the unknown. As they moved on with their lives, they couldn't shake the feeling that the asylum's curse was never fully lifted. The memory of their ordeal haunted their dreams, a reminder of the darkness that had once consumed them. The asylum, though quiet for now, remained a place of sinister whispers and lingering dread, waiting for the next unwary souls to cross its threshold.
As the darkness recedes and the echoes of our journey fade, remember, some doors are better left unopened, and some secrets best left buried. Subscribe for more. Stay tuned, for the shadows of Fear Files never truly vanish. Until next time.